Hello and welcome to my first ever Xenoblade What If video. I've never done anything like this before, so I don't have a specific template in mind, and I'm actually reading the story off from a set of bullet points as opposed to an actual script, so if things are a little iffy the first time, I apologize, but hopefully the more I do things like this, the better it will be. Also, I kind of have the entire story bulleted out and stuff, but I'm not sure how long it'll take me to get through it, so this might be a multi-parter. But without further ado, let's talk about what would have happened if the white whale did not crash land on Mira at the beginning of Xenoblade Chronicles X. I will be spoiling the original X right at the beginning of this story, basically, so if you don't want spoilers for that, be warned. For each what if I do, I'm going to start at a specific point in the timeline where my what if diverges from the original story. In this case, that will happen in the battle with the Ganglion forces above Mira right before the white whale lands. In the original story, of course, the ship took a lot of damage, and when it entered in the atmosphere, it burned up, exploded, everything was flung everywhere, and people generally had a bad time. This time, however, the big push of the Blade Fighters and Skells, led by Elma and her mysterious partner in some version of the Ares, was a lot more successful in driving the Ganglion off. The white whale itself didn't suffer much damage, and was able to touch down in the same places in the original story in South Primordia, but completely safely. As for the Ganglion themselves, I'm going to keep the same amount of their troops getting stuck on Mira as in the original story, but because they lost that fight, their gear and their Skells, all their ships, are going to be in a lot worse of a state, and their leadership's going to be in a bit more of disarray, so they're not going to actually pose as much of a threat as they did, at least right off the bat. They're going to be more, at least their upper leadership is going to be biding their time a little bit, waiting to recover their resources and try to find people to subjugate and stuff. Our story begins, as in the original, with our protagonist waking up. For the rest of the story, I'm going to be using the somewhat canon name of Cross, but since there is no quote-unquote canon gender, I'll just be going neutral for them, and that doesn't really matter because Cross isn't specifically a character in the original game in the first place, and any characters that weren't in the original game, I'm not going to flesh out any interactions or stuff between them because, well, I don't really know what their personalities would have been. But the first thing you notice is that you're not waking up from some sort of MIM stasis pod in Primordia. Cross finds themselves inside the Lifehold core, being awoken by Blade scientists who are able to resynthesize them from their human DNA that was stored in the computers. Yeah, the Lifehold core landed with NLA, so there's no such thing of humans getting stuck in their mimeosomes needing to find the Lifehold core. The thing with this what if is, the entire impetus for the plot has already been resolved just by the white whale landing, so things are going to go surprisingly not as different as you'd think from here, even though there really isn't as big of a driving force to explore. Cross is then asked a few questions by one of the doctors or scientists, and relays to them that they can't remember anything about themselves, or their backstory, or anything that's happened, besides their own name. The doctor states that this is abnormal, but was probably caused by some sort of error in transferring their genetic data into the computer, apologizing profusely, telling Cross that there's really not anything they can do to restore their memories, but still sends them outside the Lifehold core, along with a group of other people that had been woken up at about the same time. Once exiting the core, they find themselves on what appears to be a metal bridge across the ocean leading into a city behind them. Once they're across the bridge, they're met by a group of people, each of whom pair up with one of the people who was recently awakened, telling them that they'll be shown around the city of New LA and introduced to their new home. Cross's tour guide is a young woman who introduces herself as Hope Alonzi, a member of the Blade Division Mediators, and then takes Cross around for a tour of New Los Angeles. This tour is basically the same as the one Lynn gives in the original game, but it's conducted on foot and via car as opposed to in one of those flying vehicles. In addition to showing them the sights, Hope notes that it's been 2 weeks, remember not 2 months like in the original game, since the white whale landed on Mira, and that the first people who were reawakened from the core were the essential people, the already high-ranking members of Blade, the government, people like that, and everyone else after that was woken up basically by a lottery system and by family, so if you were chosen, your entire family would be woken up at the same time, so you'd be together. That seems to imply that Cross doesn't have any family who made it on the ship, but Hope chooses sorta not to dwell on that. instead pointing out one of the sites, perhaps the site of a skell or something, ripping a panel off from the white whale used to expand the city. Remember, the amount of people who were kept awake in mimeosomes in the original game was nowhere near the amount of people stored in the computer. There are 10 million people in the Lifehold core computer, but New Los Angeles is clearly way too small to hold them, so they're using materials from the white whale itself in order to expand the city, as opposed to immediately heading out into Mira to find materials to do things with. The last stop on the tour is NLA's Westgate, as Hope points to cross the site of the Plains of Primordia just outside the city, promising them that as soon as a few registration things are done and they're officially recognized as a citizen of NLA, they'll be able to go out and maybe not go too far because of the dangerous indigens, but at least take a look at the wonderful alien landscapes around them. They move closer to the end of the gate because Hope wants to say hi to one of her friends who's acting as one of the two guards there, but when they move out there, some creature comes barreling in straight towards the city, knocking over the guard that isn't Hope's friend, and knocking them out, taking them out of commission. Hope exclaims that she's never seen a Suid this close to the city before, and yells at Cross to come with her to go off to safety while she goes to evacuate a construction site that's nearby because obviously a wild creature running around there could only mean bad news. While this is happening, the other guard is drawing his weapons and preparing to engage the creature in combat, but just like his partner, he takes a small hit and looks like he's about to be cornered. Thinking quickly, Cross runs over to the body of the guard who was knocked out, takes their weapons, and starts fighting the creature themselves, saving this guy, and eventually the two of them are able to work together and subdue the Suid. Hope doesn't seem to notice that Cross broke away from her and is still seen in the background evacuating the site. Once the Suid is subdued, the guard introduces himself as Boris, thanking Cross for their help, and dragging his partner's body over to a bench nearby so they can recover in a little more peace. But right after this happens, a couple more Suids start charging straight through the gate yet again, and it's up to both Cross and Boris to take them out. Thanks to Boris shouting over a few tips and Cross's surprising aptitude for combat, the duo is able to take care of the other two Suids pretty quickly and without any serious injury. However, the reason all these Suids are running very quickly makes itself evident, as a trio of very hungry Grexes is heard to be roaring right outside the gate and on the Westgate plain itself. By this time, Hope's done evacuating the construction site and comes running back, surprised to see Cross holding weapons of course, but happy that no one was severely injured. Boris immediately fills her in on the details, and the two of them agree that there's no time to wait for reinforcements, they should probably do something about those Grex before they get in the city and can wreak any havoc. They agree, while it's probably a bad idea to have a non-blade handling another blade's weapons, they could use all the firepower they could get right about now, and tell Cross that they can come with them, just maybe stay in the back a little bit, cause they don't want to be liable for a civilian getting hurt. The three of them head out onto the plain and engage the three Grexes in combat. It's a much tougher fight than the ones against the Suids, but with a combination of Boris's leadership, Hope's support, and Cross's genuine talent, they are able to win, but just barely. Unfortunately, a stray shot during the fight nicked the leg of an even larger creature that was a little bit off in the distance, a surprisingly large Sinicula for that area of Primordia, and it comes over to attack the three. Thankfully, just at that time, the person that Boris had called on his communication device before shows up in a vehicle mode Skell, racing as fast as it possibly can out the gate, slams into the Sinicula, transforming into humanoid mode, and just generally beats the crap out of it before anyone has another chance to get hurt. Once that bloodbath is over with, someone steps out of the Skell. A mysterious-looking blue-skinned and blue-haired woman with radiant pink eyes who seems to at least know Boris surprisingly well, and introduces herself as Elma, asking who the new face is, whether Blade got some new recruit she hadn't heard about, but then Hope sorta clears up the situation. Although Elma seems to be genuinely surprised that someone who has just woken up was able to do what Cross had done this quickly after being awoken, and without really anyone encouraging them to do it. Cross just did it on their own. So she gets a little thought in the back of her mind, but we'll get back to that a little later, as the four of them now need to walk into the city. And yes, because everyone got their natural bodies back, so did Elma, and she's walking around in her true form, and basically has been the entire time. Everyone's kinda cool with it since they already respect her for what she's done. So that's another big change, there's no need for Elma to hide behind a Mimiosome. She's going to be in her true form the entire story. And while, since I don't know any of this stuff, I can't really explain any more about her race than the Zero that we're told in-game, but she will be in that form, and not really much else besides that will come from it, other than the fact that, yeah, Skell and FTL technology comes from her. Inside the gate, they meet up with two more Blades who seem to be on very friendly terms with Elma and Boris, and are called by them Irina and Gwyn. They're there to relieve Boris and their teammate Marcus, who was the one who was knocked out, at the guard post because their shift was up, and the upper management in Blade, and by that I kinda mean Elma herself, didn't really want the two of them to stay on duty after they'd already gone through an attack. Yeah, don't worry, Marcus isn't gonna die in this storyline, but he had to be the one member of Team Irina to kinda get the shaft in some way or another. Irina also asks if Cross is a new recruit or not, to which Elma replies somewhat cryptically by saying that we'll see. And it turns out that after saying goodbye to Hope, her and Boris are escorting Cross via the flying transport over to the administrative district, which is not part of NLA that was actually covered in Hope's tour. This is the first time Cross has been here. They land outside Blade Tower, and Elma mentions that, yeah, this is where everyone goes to be formally inducted as a citizen of NLA and kinda able to do their thing. However, after signing the paperwork that everyone did, Elma and Boris then take Cross to a different room on a higher floor of the tower that it looks like they needed to scan some sort of ID card to get into. Inside, they meet up with four men. One immediately introduces himself as Danny, Elma and Boris's partner on their Blade squad, and the other three are gradually made known to Cross throughout the ensuing conversation. Them, of course, being Blade Commander Jack Vandam, NLA Secretary of Defense Kentaro Nagi, and NLA Director General Maurice Chosan. Elma and Boris relay the story of Cross's heroics earlier, and all three of them seem to be somewhat impressed, Chosan a bit more detached, Vandam almost acting like he's about to make them drop and give him 20 right away, and Nagi, as usual, being the voice of reason between the two of them, and calmly asks Cross whether or not they want to join Blade. Of course, they accept, and the three of them then give the same explanation Nagi gave in the game, just, of course, giving their own personal spin on it. This explanation is pretty much the same as it was originally. In the 2 weeks, they were able to at least establish the same infrastructure that Blade had in the 2 months prior to the original game story, but there's one major difference. When talking about the role of Blade in establishing Frontier Nav and exploring Mira, they mention that instead of just going around in vehicles or walking with their natural bodies, Blades tend to hook up their consciousness to androids called Mimiosomes that very closely mimic their actual bodies, which they do because, well, it's an uncharted planet. They don't even know if humans can breathe anywhere far from Primordia, and of course there's the indigents, so they want to minimize casualties as much as possible. It is kind of expensive to replace a Mimiosome every time one gets destroyed, but it's better than actually losing a person. So this is a huge difference from the original story, where everyone was Mimiosomes, and they couldn't wake up any more people until after the core was recovered, and then of course it turned out that everyone who died actually died. Pretty much no one is in risk of actually dying in the first place in this story unless the city itself is attacked, because the Lifehold core is secure, and because they have Mimiosomes working on top of people in their natural bodies. Unfortunately, this kind of gets rid of some of the stakes in terms of possible character deaths, but in general this would be the practical thing to do, and I'm gonna roll with what the characters would realistically do in the situation as opposed to what would make a necessarily better narrative. They also mention that Skells too can be piloted remotely by putting a Mimiosome in them, and that they're also working on technology to directly link the consciousness to the Skell itself to cut out the middleman there. Cross chooses their Blade division, and is then sent to the Mimiosome Maintenance Center to have a Mimiosome made of them. It's here that they can sort of choose the base model of the Mimiosome, which would sort of affect their stats, and I'm gonna say this is where the class choice aspect comes in. I'm not designing this narrative to also be playable. I'm just thinking of how it would work as a verbally transmitted, or I guess read narrative if you read the subtitles to the video, and not how it would work well as a video game, but I do want to at least keep the fact that you can change classes and have that be justified in universe as you're using a different base model for the Mimiosome. Along the way, Cross is also introduced to Doug, Lau, and Lin, who are just introduced as friends of Team Elma. Doug and Lynn, personality-wise, are basically exactly the same as they were in the original game, except while Lynn is a combatant, she isn't an active member of Team Elma. Since the ship landed correctly in this timeline, she doesn't have her motivation to go find the core and save humanity, being her main driving source for exploration, so instead she's trying to fulfill her parents' legacy and complete the Scout flight module as quickly as possible. Lau, on the other hand, is actually completely changed. Since the Lifehold core landed with the ship, he doesn't have that whole sense of hopelessness about humanity being screwed no matter what happens, that eventually led him to betray them to the Ganglion, so he's a bit in a more stable mental place right now. Obviously, he's still incredibly upset and depressed about the fact that his family died, but he also hasn't found out that only the upper class and people that they deemed useful were the ones to get on the ship, so he still completely blames the Ganglion and the other warring faction for the death of his family. He's not angry at any member of humanity, and instead channels his frustration into combat against indigents. Of course, the Ganglion hasn't been discovered yet, so he doesn't really have sentient people to vent his frustrations on yet, but he has been known to use the battle tactic of bum rushing an enemy that there's no way he could take on foot and just detonating his mimeosome to try to take it out, because, yeah, you know, he might want to hurt himself in some ways, but he could just wake up back in his natural body and get another mim. It's costing Blade a lot, and Elma kind of recognizes this on the side, but he's such a valuable soldier that they're not forcing him to pay every time he gets his mimeosome replaced because he's just that good regardless of the tactics he uses. Once the tour of the administrative district is done, and Cross gets their own room in the Blade Barracks and their own comm device, they all four get a message from Vandam telling them to come and meet him in front of the Blade Tower because he's got a mission for them already. Cross looks a bit confused, but Danny whispers to them that Elma and Boris both took such a liking to them that they both requested for them to be assigned to Team Elma since it didn't have a fourth member at this point, and that they were going to go at least on one mission as a test drive to see if Cross was going to be part of them full time. When they meet Vandam in front of the Blade Tower, he's alongside a group of small fuzzy critters who are somehow able to speak in a very broken but still very recognizable English and introduce themselves as the Napon. Yes, they're called Napon in this timeline. I don't care. The leader of the group, who introduces herself as Coco, says that she's the leader of a group of traveling merchants called the Dodonga Caravan who are currently set up in the forest to the northwest of Primordia. The same night the White Whale crashed to Mira, which Coco seems to think was some sort of falling star, 2 children from the caravan went missing, so a group of Napon left and headed into Primordia to investigate the place where the star fell, in order to see if they were actually connected, and that's how they ended up in NLA. Since it's only been a couple weeks since the whale crashed, the Blades didn't even know that Noctilum existed at this point, so Shosan immediately realized that it would probably be a really good idea to get on the good side of these natives of Mira. Because of that, he delegated the job to Vandam with sending out Blade teams to go and find these kids, and he immediately thought of Team Elma being a good idea for it. Coco is extremely grateful for the help since one of the kids missing is her own son, and hands Elma as the team leader a follow ball, which was the one that belongs to her son and with luck would still point to where he is. It seems to be pointing to the southeastern area of Primordia, so the team gets ready to head out for their first mission. They head back into the Mimeosome Maintenance Center where they all enter pods like the one that Elma's real body came out of, and use that to be put in a sort of state where they're psychologically linked to their Mimeosome while their real body's in a catatonic state, and get ready to head out. Elma does bring the Skell that she killed the Senicula with her, which isn't the Ares in the prologue. It's a regular Urban or something. She's not bringing out the big guns for every single mission. But she does stop and leave it about halfway there because, well, she came to the realization that if they're still alive, they might need to sneak them out of somewhere, and if they're dead, they might run into the thing that killed them, and you generally don't want to alert either of those with a giant mech. This turns out to be quite fortuitous because when the signal seems to be getting pretty strong from the follow ball, they find themselves in the very same sea-swept base from Chapter 3 of the original story. Since they got there in only a quarter of the time that it took Team Elma to get there in the original story, it's not nearly as built up and well fortified as it originally was, and there are less ganglion skells, of course. But Elma, Boris, and Danny do acknowledge that the type of skell is the same kind that attacked the White Whale before they crashed, so they are definitely still steering clear though they don't recognize the Prone specifically because they're not a race the Ganglion use as scout pilots, only sort of ground troops. They eventually find exactly where the follow ball is pointing, some sort of stack of crates on the outside of one of the buildings. They do make it there successfully without raising any sort of alarm, and the most combat they have to do is sending Elma in to shadow strike a guard or two from behind so they don't arouse any immediate suspicion, make it to the stack of containers fine, and start opening them to, at least figure out if these kids are alive or dead. In 2 separate containers they find 2 small Napon, 1 yellow and 1 orange wearing a green hood, alongside a bunch of very potato-like vegetables. Once the 2 Napon are taken out of the crates, they wake up, and it does seem that they've been eating the vegetables inside the crates they were stored in to stay alive, but immediately start arguing about whose fault it was they got put in this situation in the first place. The yellow one named Tora blaming the orange one named Tatsu, and of course vice versa. This commotion, before they're able to quiet it down, attracts the attention of one of the prone guards who was inside the building they were next to, eventually leading into the same fight against the 2 prone as well as Glennar, the captain, from the original story, but again, since there are 4 party members instead of 3, they're able to dispatch them even quicker than the original story, but by then the body of the guard has been found, and they end up still having to hightail it out of there before any of the skells start chasing them, eventually deciding that Elma's gonna hop in her skell as soon as they make it back to it, and truck the Napon off to safety, while the other 3 can just kinda hang behind and distract them if anything shows up, of course detonating their mims or letting them get destroyed if necessary. Thankfully, nothing of that sort happens, and after fighting only a couple more prone, everyone manages to make it back to NLA perfectly safe. The 4 blades get back in their original bodies, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but Elma's mimeosome is designed after her real body and not a fake human form for her like it was in the original story. Since everyone sees her real body, she might as well wear it as a robot, although she does have the other fake her mimeosome that she used before the ship landed, just in case, as a backup one to have in case of emergency. And we might see that come to fruition in a later part, but I don't know. All the Napon, though of course Coco especially, are relieved to see that everyone made it back okay, Tora and Tatsu are safe, and thank the Blaze profusely, of course agreeing that the Dodonga caravan is now allied with NLA, especially because the same people responsible for destroying the humans' home planet are here on Mira, and Napon aren't the best fighters in X's universe. Lao does find out about the prone and the ganglion skells, although of course not even Elma knows that they're called the ganglion at this point, and does seem quite perturbed by this, but nothing is gonna come out of that for the time being. The big thing is that since Tatsu and Lin never meet, he never grows attached to her, doesn't want to stay with the Blades, and doesn't join them for the rest of the story. There is no Tatsu for any of the rest of this, since I'm not going into hypothetical affinity missions based off of this what if. He'd probably show up in some of those, but he's not in the main story. He's gone after this. Tora instead will join as the Napon guide because he got attached to just the team in general, possibly Cross specifically, because I'm imagining it with the same agreement where Lin would have to take care of and watch over Tatsu if they wanted him as a guide, but it's the same thing with Cross and Tora. So Tora and Cross are now kind of partners in a way. Tora will stay in their room in the barracks or whatever, and that's kind of how that goes. There's still an Napon guide to explain things and exposit about Mira. It's just a less annoying one. After that, Vandam congratulates the team on a job well done, and they all take a well-deserved break, agreeing that it is a good idea to have Cross stick with them for the rest of their travels on Mira as long as they see fit. And I think, after 24 minutes of me recording at least, and about 2 hours in terms of all the different takes, it's a pretty good time for me to stop this now. I've only got through a quarter of the main story chapters. I don't know how I originally thought I'd be able to fit the entire game story in here, but yeah, that's kind of scary. There's going to be probably at least 3 more episodes of this. And yeah, if you were wondering who Boris and Danny are, Elma has an affinity mission after completing the main game in X, where she mentions that her teammates before Cross and Lin were 2 guys named Boris and Danny who were killed by an indigen very soon after the White Whale landed. But since they're doing the whole mimeosome system, they were defeated by that indigen, sure, and possibly Elma was too, but they didn't die. They're still alive and are the ones being Elma's teammates, so that's why Lin isn't part of the actual team too, and the characters who should have been dead in the original timeline have already survived this close by in the story, and as I mentioned before, even Marcus is going to live. So yeah, that's all I got for this time. Next time we'll probably jump into chapters 4 through 6, since I guess I'll do a quarter of the story each time. I have no idea how I'm even going to edit this still. I have no idea when the next episode is going to come out, but you can always subscribe to see it when it does. And until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.